The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is no substitute for professional care by your doctor or your qualified healthcare professional. Never disregard or delay professional medical advice because of something you've heard on this podcast or in any linked material. Guests who speak on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Dr. Shirley neither endorses nor opposes any particular opinion discussed on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, practice, institution, or other entity with which Dr. Shirley may be affiliated.
Welcome to Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty. This podcast is curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD, as the definitive source of holistic wellness through beauty.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Shirley. Welcome to 15 Minutes of Fab, a segment of the Forever Fab podcast where I review products, services, experiences, and frankly, whatever, in 15 minutes or less. If the full-length podcast is a couture dress, for example, then 15 Minutes of Fab is like a button-down French cuff white shirt paired with leather leggings. If you don't have time to tune into the full-length podcast, then check out 15 Minutes of Fab, just a small dose. Some have considered it truth and beauty or plastic surgery secrets or as a nerdy or academic take on wellness and beauty with a dash of fashion. Consider it what you may. My aim is to engage you as a credible and authoritative voice in most, if not all aspects of beauty and wellness with a dash of fashion. That includes products, wellness services, technologies, innovations, new scientific research, and plastic surgery. As the founder of Holistic Plastic Surgery, my approach to beauty is through a lens of wellness that's grounded in science, backed by medical study and research, strengthened by my clinical experience, and bolstered by my surgical training with the use of principles and techniques of plastic surgery. And then there's my love of fashion, of course. I feel uniquely qualified to talk with you about beauty, wellness, aesthetics, and plastic surgery, as well as products and services within those spaces, not only because of my extensive, and may I add, expensive training and expansive background, but also because I'm one of you. Many of the human issues around aging and being a fierce fab person, as well as an agent for positive change, I live these too, and I try. You're not alone. So together we can help the world become a more beautiful, forever fab place. So if you'll have me and give me at least 15 minutes of your time, let's get at it. In this new year, I've decided that it will be one of expansion and discovery. So I'll explore all sorts of topics, near and possibly far-fetched, while still focusing on the topics that make the Forever Fab podcast, well, fabulous, namely fashion, the art of living well or wellness, and beauty. As part of my philosophy of holistic plastic surgery, which I created well over probably now 15 years ago, where I believe that beauty emanates from within, wellness plays an integral role in my practice, and this goes for many aspects of life that help you to live in grace and beauty, including nutrition, exercise, products, services, technologies, mind, body, spirit, and science. Welcome to this week's episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast. This episode is dedicated to freedom. Given that there is so much going on in the world, and that there is a celebration of freedom approaching in the United States, I thought it would be good for me to read something about that. So I'm quoting directly from Litro magazine, and this is a piece by Lorraine Devon Wilke, or Wilke, Wilke, and this is actually on the website litromagazine.com, and the title of the piece is All the Freedom Privilege Allows. I begin, and I quote directly. Janis Joplin told us that freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. But odds are good the majority of adults living in the world today, both those old enough to get that reference and those who aren't, embrace a more expansive, complex view of our most valued of human rights, personal freedom. Yet beyond hippie poetry and ingrained notions of entitlement, we of the Western world are so accustomed to the ease and permission of the First Amendment or the Human Rights Act, our codified protections to be and do what we choose, our invitations to speak our minds, pursue our happiness, love who we love, or demand free internet, that freedom as a concept is as taken for granted as the air we breathe. We revel in it, wave it, wear it, shout it from the rooftops. And as Pitbull said, feeling free, free, free. We've even developed a culture in which there is no end to the outlets through which we can express our freedom, our criticisms, our rage, our rallying cries, and civic activism. As citizens the world over spend increasing amounts of time on social media venting, with little censorship and a few restrictions, outside occasional stints in, quote, Facebook jail, end quote, or wrist-slapping Twitter suspensions, it's easy to surmise that never before have we been as free to express our views in public, however caustic, however aggressive, often directly to the person who most inspire our ire. Just read the responses on Donald Trump's or Theresa May's Twitter feeds to get a sense of our ribald cultural candor. That's freedom when you can slime your leaders in 240 characters and live to tell. Yet despite these perceptions of, quote, freedom for all, end quote, in our robust democracies, and putting aside for the moment the metastasizing autocracy of the current occupant of America's White House, the presumption of personal freedom under harsher examination is really just a presumption, because freedom is not necessarily meted out with parity and impartiality across the board. In fact, freedom, as a grand ideal, a vaunted principle, a revered right, is more honestly mitigated by factors such as wealth, class, family status, and opportunity. How free are we, really, when poverty and lack of access limit us at every turn? But when freedom really gets battered and bruised is through the filter of race and privilege, topics so rife with tension and inconvenient truths that many refuse to even confront them. Quote, "I'm tired of talking about race," a white male friend said to me. "We're all equal and we all get the same opportunities. We all got the same rights now. Blacks just need to get over their black thing," end quote. He wasn't a guy who was overly racist. He'd be the first to work with or welcome a person of color into his home. He even claimed to be as open-minded as the next guy. But as a white person, man, exempt from racial profiling, and a member of the top primary patriarchal demographic, he couldn't see how just being Black adversely impacts the day-to-day minutia of living life as a Black person. And because he couldn't see it, doesn't experience it, and clearly doesn't believe it, he feels it's a dismissible complaint, a cop-out, an excuse, which is where white privilege offers its most corrosive distraction from the reality of life for those without it. But when something is so endemic, so innate, so inherently a part of one's existence, as white privilege is to white people, is some suspension allowable for its element of invisibility? Are whites given leeway for not noticing because it's always been there? It can't be our fault if we didn't ask for it. We can't be blamed for something we didn't create. We shouldn't be criticized because we're not personally infringing on the freedom of others, right? Right? Several years ago, just as Black Lives Matter was moving swiftly into the forefront of the cultural zeitgeist, I did a 3-part interview with Regina McCrae, a Black New York entrepreneur and Black Lives Matter activist I'd met via an article I'd written earlier called
No white people will never understand the Black experience. A piece partially inspired by the fellow's quotes above. She'd read and appreciated the piece. We subsequently connected on social media, which led to my invitation to her to participate with me in a no-holds-barred conversation on the topic of race and privilege and their inexorable impact on the freedom of ease and expression of persons of color. She agreed. We covered myriad angles over those 3 interviews, from facts and statistics to erosive, emotional impact of racism, and she offered tremendous candor and illumination, both to me and the reading audience. But I found this, what she had to say in reference to the limited perspective of not only the aforementioned men, but even, to some extent, her interviewer, to most succinctly encapsulate the racial disparities found in our fractured Western societies. She said, quote, "White people are normally very comfortable when the subject of race comes up. They are quick to point out they have Black friends, they have never done anything overly racist, and that may be true. But you are all recipients of privilege, whether or not you asked for it. Recognize that every day you live in a bubble of protection, the world's biggest, deepest, most secret old boys club. You do not face discrimination in housing and employment. There are no health disparities when seeking medical attention. You are not followed in stores, nor is it assumed you can't afford to shop. You are not profiled and marginalized by law enforcement, and you are much more likely to survive a confrontation with police with not just your dignity intact, but your very life." Hashtag criming while white is a very real hashtag and exposes the instance in which people of other cultures were given the benefit of the doubt we typically are not. When you accept these benefits and don't speak up and speak out, when you quietly accept this privilege when it doesn't make you uncomfortable to know an entire segment of the population is being oppressed, losing not just opportunities, but at times their very lives, then you are complicit in racism. End quote. A smack in the face statement, a reluctant reality, a truth that dares to suggest how we may each be witting or unwitting participants, shining harsh, unremitting light on the almost naive concept of freedom for all. Because all becomes relative when even the simplest of freedoms, to live, drive, barbecue in a park, wait in a coffee shop, move into an apartment, call your mother from a hotel lobby, rest in your school library, swim in a community pool, all are determined by the goodwill of privileged whites with no special authority other than cell phones and prejudiced entitlement. When compiled statistics indicate the presence of bias when police use force, with a disproportionate number of Blacks and others of color being killed by law enforcement officers, the concept of getting over their Black thing becomes not only caustic ignorance, but an abdication of moral responsibility. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his letter from a Birmingham jail, quote, "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed," end quote. But what happens when it's demanded yet still denied? And how do whites who accept their complicity as recipients of privilege contribute most effectively to changing that narrative? I put it to Regina, figuring if anyone could offer clarity, she could. She said, quote, "I continually borrow this quote. Again, quote, when those unaffected become as outraged as those affected, things will change," end quote. Continuing, Regina said, "We need a rainbow coalition. LGBTQ, Native Americans, Latinos, the privileged and underprivileged, the Occupy movement. We can't do it alone. We cannot make as large an impact alone as we can under an umbrella. When fighting a war, you need the rear guard, the infantry, air and sea support, troops on the ground. What you can do is help change local laws, help push laws through Congress and state houses, help do away with the grand jury system, help more Blacks get elected as DAs. You can get actively involved in making public schools better so they can offer the level of education every kid deserves. You can organize and participate in community town halls so you're made aware of what Blacks in your communities are experiencing. You can step outside your world to get an honest picture of the world Blacks live in every day. You have privilege and power. Use it. Then we'll have reason to believe you are our allies. Without that, it's just talk and good intentions, end quote. Stepping outside your own world to get an honest picture of the world in which someone else lives is the very definition of empathy. And empathy is the antidote for everything. And it's not just America that needs this prescription. Though a British friend recently assured me that racism wears a very different face in the UK than the US, which I have no doubt is true, American racism being its very own unique and nationalistic cauldron, a recent study commissioned by The Guardian/ICM indicates that similar biases and prejudicial behaviors towards Blacks and other ethnic minorities are found even in the more densely compacted diversity of Britain. How these play out may be particular to the area in which they exist, but the impact on the freedoms and enjoyment of life of persons of color is unfortunately mirrored wherever it occurs, which means both the problems and the solutions apply whether here, there, or anywhere. And while the problems seem to stand in high relief, the solutions? Talk and good intentions, much like the well-meant but utterly tepid thoughts and prayers offered after every mass shooting, are ineffective panaceas extended when we can't, won't, simply don't offer what's really needed. The hard stuff. The stuff that takes a different kind of muscle, real commitment, real change, action, action, action. So change the narrative. Take your privilege and power and use it. Much like our individual contributions to avert climate change include every step we employ to lower our carbon footprint, each step we take to avert and obliterate racism, to more powerfully ensure the freedoms of every person, will have impact. They will add up. They will make a difference. Don't take time to do the math. Don't tally. Don't wonder. Just become as outraged as the affected and begin. The oppressed demand it. Freedom demands it. We should all demand it. But freedom is just another word if its grace isn't extended to all. End quote. This was an excerpt from litromagazine.com by the author Lorraine Devon Wilk. This was read directly from litromagazine.com. The author, Lorraine Devon Wilk, it states, is, quote, an accomplished writer in several genres, a Chicago native and one of 11 children, who has crafted a signature style that exudes intelligence, depth, and humor. Whether screenplay, editorial, short story, or novel, her themes focus on the complexities of real life. Her latest novel, The Alchemy of Noise, tackling issues of privilege and prejudice in a gripping tale set in contemporary Chicago. Having left Illinois decades ago with a rock band heading west, Devon Wilk landed in Los Angeles, where she lives with her husband, attorney-writer Pete Wilk, her son Dylan Wilk, and other extended family nearby. I hope you enjoyed this reading from litromagazine.com and this episode of 15 Minutes of Fab. If you didn't enjoy it, and if it caused some ire, then I hope you take some time to investigate that, search yourself, and figure out why you had the particular reaction that you did. After all, sometimes challenging information that we hear or read or listen to may be an opening, perhaps a path to growth and ultimately to freedom. So I wish you joy, peace, love, and everlasting freedom. This brings me to the close of this week's episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast. As always, stay beautiful and forever fabulous, inside and out.
Thank you for listening to this week's Forever Fab podcast episode of 15 Minutes of Fab. Until next time, live well, prosper, and stay beautiful, inside and out, and stay forever fab. If you like this episode of 15 Minutes of Fab on the Forever Fab podcast, please share it and subscribe to the feed. Did you learn anything new? Review this episode by writing just one word to describe the value you got from listening today, and give this episode a 5-star rating. In case you missed it, listen to this episode, past episodes, or check out who's coming up next on foreverfabpodcast.com. If you enjoy listening to the Forever Fab podcast, get more audio and more visuals with a membership through Patreon. Choose the gold, platinum, or diamond tier for premium added content, special co-hosts, lifestyle videos, branded merchandise, and more by visiting patreon.com/foreverfab. And if you are a founder of or represent a beauty or wellness brand and you want to be featured on an episode of Forever Fab podcast segment of 15 Minutes of Fab, send me some stuff. Visit foreverfabpodcast.com and fill out the contact form. For general holistic beauty tips or to get set up an appointment with me to discuss your personalized options for leveling up your beauty, go to elementsandgraces.com and sign up for my newsletter. And for an online e-consultation on time, anytime, and on your time, visit clicklift.com for your wellness, plastic surgery, and beauty questions on the go. And it's time for the elevated house call, wouldn't you say? Jet Set Beauty RX offers beauty on-call services near your home or other domicile, delivering beauty in the privacy of a medically equipped, state-of-the-art mobile aesthetics unit. Reserve at jetsetbeautyrx.com. That's all for now. Thank you for sharing the love. Goodbye, gorgeous.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty, curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD. Live beautifully and help make the world a more beautiful place.